What if your map was the first monster of your campaign? Not just a guide, but an actual source of dread. Welcome to Ravennos, the land of hungry gods, a place trapped by misty seas and ruled from a floating castle. And today I'm not just showing you how to draw a map, I'm going to show you how to forge a storytelling artifact. We're going to bake horror into the very lines of your world. We're going to use some gothic fonts, grim dark names, and artistic dread to set the stage for a campaign that is genuinely terrifying. Hello adventurers and welcome back to the Red Quiz. In this series we're talking about how to create maps that are suited to a particular genre. If you've ever looked at the map of Ravenloft from Dungeons & Dragons and tried to create a world in that image, we're going to talk about how you can do it today. We're going to create not only a world that is grimdark in how it's been world built, but also in how we can make a map that does reflect that theme and tells the players exactly what they're in for right from the get-go. We're going to talk about what materials we're using, what world building we're doing, and what styles we're going to be imitating in order to fulfill that function. And I know there are various different genres of horror out there, various different subcategories of the kind of horror that you can experience in a D&D or a TTRPG game, like Lovecraftian horror, for instance, which I'll do a video on later in this series, or, even survival horror in a windswept desert, such as in the Scorched Basin System-agnostic TTRPG setting, which is a way that you can create a sort of Mad Max and Dune-inspired setting for a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. It's a Kickstarter that's finishing on October 9th, and I'm not only promoting it because it's cool, I also collaborated on the project. So if you like my channel and you like the idea of a TTRPG that's based in a Mad Max sort of desert Dune-inspired, almost sort of slightly post-apocalyptic futuristic vibe, then this is a great way to support both of us. There's a referral link in the description below. You can check that out, have a look through it. It's a system-agnostic setting, which means that it can work with D&D or Daggerheart or Call of Cthulhu or whatever TTRPG you really want to play with. The exciting stuff is the setting itself, the NPCs that it comes with, the 2 languages, the cookbook recipes, and of course the soundtrack, which I'm really, really keen and excited for. So you can check all of that out through the link in the description below. But otherwise, we're going to get back to this map of our horror setting. Every great fantasy campaign needs a map, right? It's our anchor, the shared space where the story happens. But for a horror campaign, a standard fantasy map with its cheerful green forests and inviting towns doesn't just fall flat, it does actively work against you. It sets the wrong tone. It promises adventures when it should be whispering about dread. It gives you clarity when it should be wrapping secrets in shadow. So today we're flipping that on its head. We're going to treat our map not as a navigational tool, but as a way to make our players feel oppressed. It's the very first piece of lore that your players will see, and it has to do some heavy lifting. It needs to scream the core themes of your world before you've said a single word. Our map of Ravennos has to look and feel like it was scratched into parchment by someone who lived and died in a grim, terrifying place. It needs to feel like an artifact soaked in fear. And don't worry, this isn't about becoming a master artist overnight. I'm going to be using techniques that are fairly easy to imitate, and I'm going to be reminding you as you go on to take your time and be certain about what you do before you put pen to paper. We're going to be using very simple tools here. This is just ink and gray watercolors, and you don't even need to use the watercolors themselves in order to make a map that looks like this and has that vibe to it. So if you want to give it a go, follow along. Before we even think about touching pen to paper, the most important work happens in our notes. A map is a visual story, and every story needs its key locations or points of interest. For a standard fantasy map, you might jot down, the Sunken City or Dragon's Peak. But for Ravennos, we need to dig into a vocabulary of horror. We're brainstorming names that aren't just labels, they're story hooks. So this is what I call the story first method. I always make a list of locations before I even think about the shape of the continent because it grounds the whole process in narrative. For several maps I've done before this, particularly the city maps, I've always talked about how you should label things before putting the details in because it allows you to not crowd your map. And that requires you to understand what naming structures you're going to be using. Our world is about oppressive rulers, hungry gods, and a land that's steeped in misery. And the names have to reflect that. So instead of Northwood, we get the Weedwood, a name that sounds sick and decayed. Our river isn't just the river, it's the River Lethe. A central town won't be something pleasant like Oakhaven, it'll be Craven Tower, which tells you everything you need to know about justice in this land. And let's make a quick list to guide the drawing. We'll have the capital, that's air above, completely different to the rest of the naming structures. It's kept away and above them. It's tethered to the ground by the iron chain. And this immediately shows a power dynamic, a ruling class that's literally floating above the suffering. And all around the island, there's a vast nothingness. The surrounds here is clear. The question has been answered. And when I say that, in a lot of grimdark campaigns, there's a question, a constant ask of why don't they just leave? And this is the answer to that. All around is a worse fate than living under the cruelty of air. The peaks. And in horror and grimdark, everything is hostile. The peaks here are a jagged, sharp way of reminding everyone that that also applies to nature. They push through the lands of the peasantry, they curb and compress them. The wilderness in forests like the Witchwood and the fens, like the Hag's Reach, they're throughout the lands. Like travelers huddling around a fire in the dark, we want the miserable clusters of houses in the towns and the villages to feel fearful, but better than the alternative. The wilderness outside is cold and dark, and life in captivity is still better than death. And all through the land, we want evidence that air has imposed their cruelty, that people live in poverty. The powerful have control over everything, nature and civilization alike, and the weak control nothing. Swathes of forest have been reduced to stumps of dead wood, monasteries destroyed, gallows and monuments are littered throughout. And throughout this map, I wanted to approach the concept of mapping not just being a way of expressing world building, but being a way of building the world itself. And what I mean by that is not only do I use the names like, the Gallows Crossroad, the Inn of the Fool's Errand, the Example, Low Lacking, all of those do give a feeling of a world that is grimdark. But I also wondered to myself as I made the map and I named all these things, whether or not a map and an awareness of the land itself could be used as a tool by the oppressor to keep people under their thumb or as an expression of their cruelty. So as a map is something that allows someone to see the whole of the land in the palm of their hand, you can use that map to remove their hope and their understanding that the world is a gentle place. If the map expresses only horror and death, then that's all that people will think that the world contains, because that's all that the map shows. So as I go through, I think about how the oppressors in air renamed locations in order to make them feel more hostile, less homely, less comfortable, and to remove any sense of safety and comfort from the population below. Changing the name of a town like Riverwood to Smogmire is a cruel stroke in a creepy game. And you can see the pattern as well. These names do more than just identify a place. They tell a tiny story. They're active, they're descriptive, they're emotionally loaded, using a pseudo-Latin or esoteric style or a Teutonic style. Can also really crank up that grimdark feel to imitate the significant horror novels in the genre in the English language, like in Frankenstein or in Dracula, both of which have Central European roots. All right, let's start drawing. We're aiming for a hand-drawn, authentic feel, like this map is a real object from the world. And you don't need fancy tools. A good piece of paper, and maybe one with some texture or a cream color and a couple of simple pens are all it really takes. I like to use fine-tip black ink pens in a few different thicknesses to get some nice variation. And first of all, forget about rolling dice for a coastline. I have been asked about that a lot. And I personally, and look, I'm not insulting anyone here, but I hate that as a concept, because while it does give your world a randomness, and if you want that randomness to feel natural, then there are other ways to do it. But relying on chance to create your map removes the impetus from you to think about what the world represents, to flesh out the world in a way that feels like you have considered every practical detail, and it removes the opportunity for you to tell more of a story. We are designing this landmass with a purpose. Our theme is oppression and entrapment. Ravennos is a land caged in by misty and impassable seas, so our continent should feel like that cage. So we're going to start by drawing the large central landmass. We're not making the coastline gentle. I'm using jagged, sharp, almost violent lines. It is an isometric map as well, so we have to take that into consideration. And then we shape the land to feel hostile. Instead of wide open plains, we're creating narrow, choking valleys and peninsulas. We're going to throw in mountain ranges that don't just sit there. They look like they're clawing at the land. They create natural barriers that cut off communities. These aren't majestic snow-capped peaks of high fantasy. These are cruel, jagged fangs erupting from the earth. When we draw our mountains, we're not going to draw beautiful individual peaks. We'll use clusters of sharp, overlapping triangles. While I've chosen a style that mimics the chaos of natural peaks, I've also kept it fairly simple, and I've only defined them later on by using a very simple hatching method, which I'll go into when we get there. Think about the flow of the land. In Ravennos, the whole continent is dominated by the floating castle on the island air above. That's going to be tethered to the anchor on the western side of the island. And I wanted that to feel genuinely purposeful because I wanted to remove the high fantasy aspect to it. While, high fantasy wants you to crank everything up to 100. And in that particular case, this floating castle, would be a singular beam of light which juts up from a peak right in the center of the land and, wends its way through the castle. And that's how people travel to and from. I wanted this to feel like it could be real, that this is an extension of the natural everyday cruelty and oppression that we see in our own world. And so in order to do that, I wanted it to feel like they had tethered the castle somewhere in order to not make themselves look good, but to actively dishearten their enemies. So they've anchored it via a vast spiked chain in the center of one of their towns, and they travel to and from the continent using that chain. And with the bones of the world in place, it's time to add our icons, the simple symbolic drawings of our named locations. And the key here is to keep it simple and moody. We're not creating photorealistic drawings. We want some spooky, evocative silhouettes that a player gets in a single glance. And the great tip is to sketch out your icons on a scrap piece of paper before you commit them to the real map. I've had a great deal of practice on other maps before doing this. But if you consider the map as a whole, it looks complicated. If you look at each of the individual icons, you'll see that they're very, very simple. That's a trick that you can use. Simplistic icons repeated over a large area make the whole thing look complex. And you want to find a way of making an easily repeatable, very simple icon for each of the landmarks as you go through. Let's start with the big one. Our capital city will sit on a floating island, and to draw it, we're not sketching a friendly castle. We're going to draw a dense cluster of sharp rectangles and triangles, and we're going to think of a briar patch made of stone. The silhouette will look oppressive, with no clear, welcoming gate. It should look like a fortress that is designed to protect. It has a function. It is not a palace made for the enjoyment of the arts. It is a military complex, and I want it to feel that way. And then from its underside, I'm drawing one single heavy chain that links it into the center of Sorbrak. And that one visual is so symbolic. It shows that the rulers are literally detached from the world below. They're held in place by a symbol of bondage. And it should really drive home the decadence of the people above, the oppression of the people below, and the method that they're being held there by. A chain is not inherently magical. In fact, iron is almost the opposite of magic. They are being held by mundane means, not by an expression of magical prowess. When you're creating the forests, like the Norwalk would, avoid drawing some happy, fluffy little trees. Instead, a simple trick will work wonders. We're going to represent the forest with a collection of simple triangles for pine trees, or gnarled, bare trunks with branches like claws. We're going to cluster them fairly tightly together so they look like a dense, impenetrable mass. So for the purpose of this map, I have, as I have in many of the other maps that I've used, several thicknesses of fine liner pen. While I've used a thick pen for the exterior shapes, a 0.6 millimeter fine liner pen for the outside of the island and for the mountain peaks, and I've used a slightly thinner pen, a 0.4 millimeter for the labeling, most of the details of the map, most of the labels have been done using a 0.2, a 0.1, and a 0.05 millimeter black fine liner pen. And that has allowed me to fill the map with detail in a way that fleshes out the whole world. And I would recommend doing that yourself. Rather than using one pen to fill the entire map, what you want to be doing is creating a lot of detail using a thinner pen. And again, if you use that simple trick, that very simplistic style of icon that you repeat quite often, in the same way that I've done the trees here, then that's a lot easier than it sounds. It's not nearly as much detail because you don't have to put the forethought into it, as long as you've got the designated areas. And another trick as you go through and do that is if you label the area, you don't have to add any details or icons underneath that label. So the more labels you have, the less work you actually need to do. So hot tip for you. While we're here, swamps are perfect for horror. To draw the Hag's Reach fens, I didn't even draw water. I've used a mixture of clusters of dots, clusters of thin lines, and those sparse hand-like trees reaching through the ground to suggest an unkempt, dangerous landscape. And by varying it like that, I've given the impression that it's not uniform, that it is strange and otherworldly, that it's not tidy or civilized in any way. It is a wilderness, and I really, really want to reinforce that as we go through. And there are other icons that I've got going through as well. I've got a few ruins, I've done the towns and the castles, and I've got other individual places as well. When I've done the towns, it's very simple concept and shape. I don't want anyone to feel like they can't repeat that very easily. They have a very simple box. If you do the outline of the box in a slightly thicker pen, in this case, the 0.1 millimeter, and you have it so that you've got the exterior and the main line, you could just got the planes of a very simple shape. You've got a peaked roof and walls. Then you can come in with a thinner pen, use simple straight lines along the side of the roof to show which way it's angled, and then you have dotting for the doors and the windows. That's all you really need. That kind of simple shape done small enough and repeated, 7 or 8 times, will show what looks to be a very, very detailed drawing of a village. It's actually quite simple. You just want to trick people into thinking that there are more details on the map than there actually are. And there are other icons like that as well. Instead of just villages, we've got castles as well that follow the same thought. Castle Gloam that I'll do later doesn't have the same level of detail and shading that Castle Air does, because when you're creating a map, it's important to remember the more details an area has, the more it will draw the eye. I want air to be the focus of the map for anyone who looks at it. Everyone's attention will eventually go up to the island in fear and horror, and so I want to draw their attention to that. As we go through and we do other icons as well, like the Lost Abbey and the Gallows Crossroad or the Example, I'm going to be using very, very basic shapes to give the impression of what they are without actually really needing to draw them, using the thin pen and very simple lines. Okay, our map has a lot of the details on it now. We've talked about the iconography that we've been using, and I will talk as well about the Gothic fonts. Now, the fonts are the first thing that we've added to the map, but I've saved talking about them till later because I wanted us to focus on making the iconography feel real, because the fonts for this particular map was honestly the more challenging part of it. It is something that you will want to spend more time doing if you want it to look really, really clean. That needs to be the focus of the detail rather than the icons themselves. Again, the rule of thumb is whatever is the most detailed part of the map is what the eye will be attracted to. And in this case, because we want to really reinforce that Gothic theme, that horror, that grimdark, I've used a Gothic font, and I've put a lot of time and effort into making the font look good. Now, you can find plenty of free Gothic or blackletter fonts online. You can just do it by hand, by copying those. That is what I did. Or if you're making your map online, it's really, really simple and easy to just get a font as you type it out. I prefer doing things by hand. It allows me to slightly alter the font to my own purposes. So for instance, as you go through, you can see that while I have followed the general shapes of the fonts that I found as a guide, I have slightly altered the tails of the G's, the F's, and the Y's in order to give it a more fantastical feel, because I did want to combine that Gothic feel with the fantasy to create the horror fantasy vibe of the map, rather than just being one or the other. I've also changed up the style of writing between major labels and minor labels. So you can see it first when I did the labeling of Ravennos in the top corner of the map. It's got the main title, the subtitle, and then underneath that there's a brief description where the weak perish beneath the boot of the strong and darkness reigns. And that is in a very untidy, very small scrawl that is honestly just my normal writing. And that allows me to differentiate between labels that are significant, like the labels for towns or the labels for rivers or mountains, and things which are more colloquial, added later to the map, like the various peaks, like the various fields and forests. And that's honestly really good, again, for drawing the eye and making it feel like there's a lot more history and culture to the map. Using different fonts like that can really add to the world building in a way that honestly might surprise you. And last of all, I'm going to finish up and I'm going to add a couple of details to really make the map pop. And the first of which is, as I go through, I am going to create the compass. Again, I'm going to use that very Gothic vibe to imitate what I've done already and to make it feel like this map is practical, despite the fact that it really isn't, if I'm being perfectly honest. An isometric map like this looks good, but it's not actually viable for someone who wants to travel around. You really do need a top-down map if you want to be navigating or exploring or trading. This is just to give a vibe to your characters and yourself and give an understanding of the world. It really is good for immersion, but it's not good for someone who's already in the world. That being said, adding a scale and a compass does make it feel a lot more practical, and it's what I've done here. Again, using the different thicknesses, adding in that flair of Gothic font will add to the immersion there and bring the aesthetic together. And then we can come in with the watercolor paint. And up until this point, all I have done, everything that I've done has been in pen, and only this is painting part. But as I add it through and I use this sort of chaotic brush stroke style to add much more in and create that feeling of the shadows encroaching and have the focus drawn to the center of the map, not only does it cover a lot of the areas that I haven't put a lot of effort in, which is very time-saving if you want a complete feeling product without putting that much effort into the exterior, it does add a border that has a lot of weight to it, physically and metaphorically. It does remind you that there's nowhere else to go, and it makes this feel like an artifact. It's very, very simple to do. Honestly, the watercolor is very easy to come by. I just used a charcoal gray here and spent a little bit of time using individual brushstrokes to add it on. And once I was done, then hand painted the border around the outside as well. And then I added the final touch. My favorite piece of world building was, I thought, you know what, I will add a little bit of some blood splattering here. Okay, it's not actually blood, it is just, watercolor paint. It's red mixed with brown that I've used here and splattered over it. And you can do this however you want. I just tried some dotting and some flicking in order to give it that pop. And I think the red pop of color really brings the map together and makes it feel a lot more alive and immersive. But on the other hand, that red against the black also really reinforces the vibe, the genre of the campaign. So I would absolutely recommend doing this for your own. And then finally, we finish up this map. Let's take a step back and look at what we've made. It's no longer just a map of Ravennos, it is a warning. And the oppressive shape of the landmass makes you feel trapped before you even read a single name. The jagged mountains and the dark forests, they promise a tough, dangerous journey. The icons aren't destinations, they are threats. A floating castle built on sorrow, cities that look like stone traps, bogs that swallow all sounds. The names themselves are a laundry list of despair. Gallows Crossroad, low lacking, the ruins of Castle Gloam, the example. The Gothic script feels like an ancient curse. The stains and burns on the paper tell a story of a long, hard history. And every choice that we made for this map was deliberate, to bring it all together and make it feel like a part of the world. And I think we really succeeded in doing that. So what do you think of this map of Ravennos? You can download the digital version online on the Patreon. You can find the link in the description below if you are interested. If you're going to make your own, please join the Red Quills Discord and show us what you have created. We've got hundreds of map makers on there now. We're all sharing our projects, talking about world building, answering questions, doing challenges, and it's always great to have new people. Thank you to everyone who already supports the Red Quills channel. It's because of you that I can do all of these videos and challenges that I am currently doing. The recent world building challenge that I did and the map making challenge that I have coming up in November. All of these are just an absolute dream to be able to do, and I hope to be able to keep doing them for a long time. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like and subscribe. Follow along for more. I'm coming out with 2 videos every week now, and I'm going to be continuing this series of maps of a different genre throughout the next couple of months. If you have a genre that you would like to see, stick it in the comments below. Until next week, in which we're doing cozy fantasy, I will be on the Discord, I'll be prepping new maps, and I will see you then. Have a good one, and happy mapping. Actually blood, because of reasons. It's not actually blood, because it's not actually blood, despite my initial plans. I thought that it would be very fun. No, stop saying that.